Hi everyone. Oh, look at we I love this. We have so many people joining. Welcome to the coffee chat. We're going to kind of give like 1 minute for people just to keep popping in, but it is so lovely to see so many faces on here. Okay, fun fact while you guys are signed up. So, the first coffee chat that ATP held was held by the Workforce Skills Division of ATP when I was president, because it was COVID and we couldn't figure out how to keep us all together. And so that's what started our coffee chat. So grab your coffee or whatever and, cheers to 6 years later. Here we are, coffee chatting still. I love it. Thanks, you guys. I love that.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, we're going to just let folks continue to jump in. We are absolutely delighted to have so many friendly faces on here, new faces that I don't recall seeing before, so that's always fun. Um, we're going to first just do a quick introduction because we do have some, I will call them honored guests with us who were previously with us on a webinar. And so I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, and I'll go ahead and start. So my name is Rachel, and I am on the ATP Security Committee along with Jake and Will, and Isabel is not here. She would have been leading this otherwise, but she's traveling, so she may be able to link in from the airport, but she was not able to really kind of host. Um, and this was kind of a brainchild after we had, well, I guess, let me tell you a little bit more about myself first. Sorry. I'm an attorney. I head up Cornerstone Strategies. We provide services to the industry. I am a total exam security nerd. I like to say this is my happy place. And so seeing all of you here is also wonderful because I think the more we have people paying attention to exam security and we share with one another, the better we can help our industry. So I love seeing all these folks on here, and I love seeing names that I know, like Gary and Cornelia. And so thank you, everyone. Laura. So Will and Jake and Isabel and I are on the security committee, and we had such a wonderful response to the webinar that Wally and Claire and Bossum were kind enough to volunteer and share some information that we thought we'd carried over to this conversation. So first I'm going to ask Wally and then Claire to introduce themselves, and I'll get to Will in just a minute. Wally, do you mind starting?
Yeah, no, thank you, Rachel, and thanks for organizing this and with help of ATP and I hope tea is okay. I'm doing tea as opposed to
Perfect.
coffee, so that's good. Thank you.
I'll be
Um,
bubbling you. A bubbler.
no, it's an honor to be back and have the opportunity to have great conversations with everybody. So my name is Wally Dalrymple, and I'm the Chief Security Officer at ETS and PSI, and I look forward to a good conversation.
Me too. Claire?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Claire. I'm based in the UK. I work for Cambridge University Press and Assessment. We deliver lots of assessments globally, but I specifically work on English language exams. And like Rachel, I would describe myself as a test security nerd. I get super excited and super interested about all sorts of test security things.
I love that. And stepping in for our friend Bassem Baig, who was here for our webinar with Duolingo, is his very knowledgeable and much taller colleague, Will. So, Will, do you want to introduce yourself? Not that you can tell on the screen.
Thanks, Rachel. Hey, I'm Will Belzak. I am a measurement scientist at Duolingo. I've been there for about 5 years. I co-lead our proctoring team, so can definitely answer any and all questions on the proctoring side as well as general test security from the Duolingo perspective. Super excited to be here with Wally and Claire, and hopefully I can do just as good of a job as Bassam. Bassum's amazing, but yeah, great to be with you all.
Thanks, Will. Okay, so just a couple of things as we get into this. First of all, this is just a conversation. So Claire, Will, and Wally, we don't have an actual presentation. I do have, though, the questions that were submitted during the webinar that we weren't able to get to during the webinar. So I'll start with just some seed discussions questions, pardon me, just to seed the conversation with that. Um, and I've asked our honored guests, as well as all of you, as our still very lovely guests, to raise their hand if they would like to contribute to that conversation. And I'm going to ask all of you to do that as well, because this is intended just to be a discussion. It's community building. All of you have your own experiences here, and you may have other questions here. And so we just want to make sure that, we're having a dialogue and not not a kind of presentation, more formal presentation. So let me think. I think that should give us kind of the structure that we wanted moving through here. And so with that, I'm going to just pose one of the first questions that we had, which was about strategies. This came in during our webinar. What strategies are in place within your examination security framework to identify and address proxy testing rings? And while our folks are thinking about raising hands for that, I do want to let you guys know one of the things I loved about our webinar is oftentimes when we have conversations about remote testing, online proctoring, or in-center versus other types of proctoring, we have it with a wide range of testing programs. And so there's always conversations around, well, it's about stakes, or it's about your demographic, or it's about the age of your candidates, right? And I love that Claire and Wally and Will are all very familiar and very intimately involved in language testing. So we've got this group of programs that all deliver language tests, and they all deliver it to some very common demographics, and those tests are used for very similar use cases across all of them. But each of their programs had some different ways that they approached exam security, and they approached, where exams could be delivered. So if you weren't able to make our webinar, I'll just kind of give that little bit of context for us. And with that, I didn't see who raised their hand first, so I'm going to go to Claire just because she's on my screen. So.
Oh, it was Will raised his hand
Go for it,
first, so
Claire.
happy to go to Will first. Okay, I'll just give a couple of examples, and then I'm sure we'll build on this. I say two examples of things we think about whenever we're looking at cheating rings. One is data. So you gather a lot of information about our test takers, what they're doing, where they're doing it. It can be things like the payment data, things like they tried to change their email address just before, or tried to change a name just after a test. We look at all that data and put it together and see what patterns we're seeing. And also, if we know of a cheating ring, we often know some of the data that's associated with them. So we will look out for that appearing. So sometimes we can predict where some of the cheating ring test takers are going to turn up and then take appropriate action. And then the other thing is a lot of these cheating rings, they offer their services on social media. And so we are looking at social media, and some of that's directly in my own team, and some of it is using external agencies who specialize in this and looking for where those services are advertising and what they say they're doing. And sometimes we will run a sort of covert operation where we will get in touch with them and find out what the price tag is, what they claim to be able to do, and then we can use that to build into sort of feeding into how we protect the security of the exams.
Yeah, Duolingo is very similar in that regard. We use a lot of data, and we have also our own, we call them threat investigators, who will go out to these social media sites, but also sometimes they go to physically to the cheating rings to see what kinds of methods that they're using. As a lot of people know, once you institute a new tool to identify cheating rings that have a high incentive to circumvent that will quickly do that. So you constantly have to be going to these people, and they're changing their organizational names. So you have to be tracking this constantly. And just to add what Claire said is that part of the data that we're using is, I mean, it can range from like Wi-Fi signals to keystroke analysis, scores, whether there's similar scores across the same group of people, even looking at whether the background from the video is the same. So it's taking a combination of all of these data, surfacing that to proctors and having them make, in our case, the final decision about whether someone has, is is being helped by a service or and then also nipping in the bud on the other side of with threat investigation and um, yeah, so that's kind of how Duolingo does it.
Thanks, Will. Wally, I see your hand up.
Yeah, just to add to what Will and Claire said is so we know if we're, if we're talking about organized cheating rings, um, understanding how they're obviously financially motivated. That's their goal. They really don't care about, our business or the programs or the exams or tests that we're providing. They just see it as a dollar figure. And so understanding how they operate, so getting into the behaviors on what they're how they operate, because we know that, for instance, most organized cheating rings, if you have remote proctoring as part of your program, they will not come into your house. They want you to come to them. And for the obvious reasons, if they go to your house, it's not a space that they're very familiar with. So they don't feel comfortable going into your house. They feel more comfortable if you come to them. So because they have staged an environment, most likely, because again, if you're doing this from a financial business perspective, you want as much volume to come through your door that you have set up and staged as you can get, because that's the only way that you're going to be profitable is you have to get customers to come in and use your services, right? So they are clearly trying to, in some cases, disrupt our businesses. So our goal is to understand how their business runs and where they like to do business. And then our strategies are all built around protecting our integrity of our scores that we provide, the credentials that we provide, because we'll have some sort of credential, and protecting that impacts their business because they're trying to do it from fraudulent perspective.
Yeah, just a couple of things that I want to add in here. One is, one of the things that's so important about data is one, you have to capture it, and two, you have to make it accessible. And I cannot tell you how many times I've worked with, a testing program, doesn't matter whether it was in-house or whether it was through Cornerstone, where they're like, either you find out your team didn't capture that data or they captured the data, but it's almost important to get to it. I see people's heads nodding. I think that's one of the reasons it's so important for exam security folks to have conversations when it comes to building design and development capabilities. When you're bringing in a new vendor, your access to that data becomes really important. And if you don't know what they capture and that you can get to it, it makes it really difficult to do some of the things that Wally and Will and Claire were talking about. Another thing really quickly is Selma had texted in there, like, what are we talking about when we're talking about proxies? And just to be clear, when we're talking about proxies, it could be me stepping in to take a test for Claire and I just show Claire's ID. So it could be the physical presentation. It could be Claire sits in front of her screen and I am somewhere else and I'm finding a way to get around lockdown browsers and other security tools to physically take that for her. Or it could be that instead, and this was kind of what Wally was talking about, instead of me taking the test, I can't remember which of us was the proxy now, but let's say I'm the proxy taking it for Claire. Sorry. I could go to Claire's house, but what Wally was saying is no, we'd rather have that run out of a common site. And Will had talked about when it's being run out of a common site, sometimes if it's a physical person as opposed to a machine, or it's being run remotely, that's where you can start to see, hey, wait, I feel like I saw, that weird plate back there before, or whatever it is. It's my kid's handprint, by the way. So anyway, so any of those things can be proxy testing. And Ada, thanks for raising your hand. Is it Ada? Did I say that right?
It's Aida, thanks.
Alita. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't hear
Aida, Aida.
Aida. Oh, even better. Okay, got it. Aida.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to add my 2 cents here, and especially talking about data. So I'm not sure if it's organized proxy testing, but I'm pretty sure it's proxy testing. And so what we're starting to look right now is just kind of weird or irregular or unusual behaviors. So usually what we'll do is you can actually look at data with their response patterns. So how long they spend on each question, if it's a multiple choice question. So normally what we're starting to see is somebody at the beginning of their test just sits and waits and does nothing. for a
Yeah.
while. It's like 5 minutes, and they just kind of sit there and does nothing. And then all of a sudden you see the mouse start moving, and then the questions start getting answered in a kind of consistent fashion. It's like A next, C next, D next, so on. And so that to us now is starting to signal, okay, there's somebody else remoting in or controlling the computer. So you can look at, before you even get to the video, you can look at these response patterns. And usually things like, what we'll do is we have like a constructive response question. They'll usually go to the end of the exam, or they'll click through the first few questions at the beginning, which we interpret as basically they're telling the proxy what exam form it is. So like the proxy needs to find out what the exam form it is, and then they get to the right form, and then they start this regular pattern of behavior. So these are sort of the things we're starting to see. I don't know how organized it is, but it's definitely signaling a proxy.
Yeah.
And I don't want to put a tangent on this conversation, but if you guys have a chance to discuss about what to do if you want to nullify these results, but you don't want to disclose too much information. And then they come back to you and say, but I did do nothing wrong, right? Because obviously they're not breaking any overt rules. So I don't know if you guys want to have that discussion later. But yeah.
Yeah, we certainly can. I can give you just a little bit of insight into when it comes to nullifying your results. The first thing that you need to look at is your contract. So did you reserve your right to do that? And then there are ways to make sure that within your contract you have given yourself permission to nullify results if either the individual is engaging in behavior that is contrary to your contract, or that you cannot stand behind the scores from a validity purpose. And then depending on what you're using for that, that tells you what kind of evidence you might need to cite. But I agree with you, Aida, you don't want to kind of give them the recipe to get around your, whatever security parameters that you have in place and whatever you're using to identify that. So I will say one thing that I think is really interesting is that in the past, a lot of these uh, formal cheating services, it's not that they're new. They've been around for a long, long time, but they were primarily focused on kind of the big hitters like language tests, ACT, SAT. And now what we've seen is almost, I'll call it a democratization of cheating, because you now can find someone with a lot of those specialized skills. Maybe you're in, ophthalmology or podiatry or, a specialized social work. And with AI backing this, you no longer need a smart human who's willing to cheat for someone else. You can just have a smart machine and people who are willing to kind of set that up. So I do think a lot of smaller programs or more specialized programs that were kind of insulated from this because the business of cheating made sense to go where there was big volume, because the cost of engaging in that behavior has gone down. It's really, I think, made some smaller programs, and I don't know what program you're with, Aida, so I didn't mean to imply that, but it's I think allowed for these programs to or these cheating services to absolutely expand. And maybe before they were more focused on a healthcare or on an IT license or certification, and now they've absolutely seen where there's other opportunities for them to move into. So I think a lot of the things that you're talking about and looking at latency time, for example, is some of the data that Claire and Will would be looking at as well. If you're looking at, is the pattern coming back and timed? One of the things, to Will's point, that we see is then they'll try and do it so it's more humanized and that the timing isn't, quite as consistent. So as we see these continue to evolve, I love that this is where we're sharing some of that information, because it's really important, I think, to see what people are coming up against and how they're starting to pivot on the other side of things to try and get around like the consistent latency time, for example. Wally, I see you have your hand up. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna comment, and Rachel, you're exactly right. You have to have a policy, right? If you don't have a policy that specifies how you can enforce potential fraudulent activities or any other activities that you have defined as part of your exam, whether that's in a test center or remote proctoring, whatever the modality is it always starts with a policy, because without a policy, you could have the best security program in the world, but you don't have anything to support your actions. So I always try to look at things from defensibility. So if a human makes the decision, and the decision is to do something with that score, could be to hold the score, could be to cancel the score, whatever your policy allows for enforcement or actionable, you have to have evidence to support it. So if your policy supports your actions and you have data, which is your evidence to support it, then everything is now defensible. So I always look at it as if I had to go to a court of law, which sometimes happens in our business, can you defend the decision that your organization made? And then that helps with some of the unusual, abnormal behaviors that you're seeing. Whether time on task, how quickly they're going through it. Because also I think you want to look at like what the objective is, and you mentioned forms and items. So many times from an organized ring, their goal is item harvesting. Why? Because they want to basically see if they can't capture all the items from your test bank so that they can resell them potentially online or to people that are willing to pay for it. So if their intention is to harvest items, then a metric that might pick that up is they're just clicking through the pages as quickly as possible, because they don't really care about the score at the end of the day. They just want to see how many items in different ways of harvesting them that they can get, because that point in time test isn't their objective. They're sort of planning for the future so that they can, continue to do what they do.
Yeah. Aida.
Yeah, just to kind of add to that policy side of things, I'm based in Canada, so I think the regulators around exam security and stuff like that are probably not caught up to the US side of things, perhaps. But I think from a policy perspective, yes, you can have a policy, but it's not the defensibility part that's kind of challenging for us. It's the transparency part, right? So, if I was to consult a lawyer like Rachel, the lawyer would say, well, you need to be defensible, you need to be consistent, you need to be transparent. But then you don't want to be too transparent because they're not overtly breaking the law, or the rules, but you know that they're doing something shady. So
Aida, can I just jump in really quickly?
yeah.
I think one of the things that courts have been very consistent on is you don't have to prove cheating and you don't have to prove breaking the rules. Your job is to say, I can stand behind this score as valid. If you have reasons to be concerned that the score is not valid, that's your job. And it's a slightly different shift in the conversation, but it's a really important one. And I think for all of us, it's important to remember that we're not here trying to prove cheating. We are here to say either we have enough evidence to stand behind this score or we don't, because from a regulatory standpoint, that's what you're there for. And so I would really encourage you not to look at you didn't break a law, and again, I'm going to say it's not even really policy, it's contract. You've got your contract and it's, can I stand behind this score? Is there something in this score that I'm not comfortable with? Sometimes it's, yeah, you got that score and it's a valid score, but you did it and we're breaking your contract while you were doing it. So let's say Claire came in to take the test. She did it. She did just fine, but she was also recording it at the same time, right? Her score is fine, but she breached her contract. So I may revoke that score because of the contract breach, which is a little different than saying Claire came in and took her 3-hour exam in 15 minutes. It's not even humanly possible to read the test that quickly. I can't, as a testing program, stand behind the validity of that result. So,
yeah, but I think
go ahead.
But I think where we're still kind of stuck on is, okay, everything is great, like validity-based kind of nullification, but the student says, and I have a contract, and they sign off on the contract, and then we say, validity-based, can't validate the results, you're nullified. And they're like, I want to know why. I want to know why. I want a review process. And we
Mhm.
don't want to tell them why, right? Because collectively we looked at the evidence and we can't stand behind this result. And then they're still, but it's not fair. I want to know not why you're not being transparent. So I was like, I want to stop them. Like I want to cut it off. But, and even if I give them a review process, what are we going to review? You know what I mean? I would
Yeah,
still
so
say,
in the United States,
yeah.
there's actually, particularly for exams that are used for admissions exams, and I do have to preface this with I am not giving you legal advice, anyone on this call, nor are we establishing an attorney-client relationship. But in the United States, there's something called the truth in testing laws, and it does require that kind of disclosure. So I guess what I'm going to tell you is there's a way to do it without giving them the secret sauce. And we can talk offline about that. But you have to do it in the US if your test is being used for admissions purposes because of the truth in testing laws in New York and California. And so, there's ways that you can address how you give them that information without completely, you're showing them some things, but you're not showing them everything. Will, I think you had your hand up, and then we'll go to Kelly.
Yeah, just if we're talking policy, I want to piggyback on what Salma said in the chat, which is around offering test takers to be able to retake a test, which
Hmm.
is kind of like another tool in your arsenal that if you don't have the evidence that you feel like you need to say someone was definitively engaging in misconduct, but you also don't feel comfortable validating their score, you can, if you have the means to offer for free to allow them to retake the test. And that's something that we use a lot at Duolingo. We actually have multiple levels. If
Hmm.
some things we think are pretty likely unintentional, but we still aren't confident that we want to validate their score, we'll let them retake the test for free. Then we have something else where we're pretty sure they were cheating, but we wouldn't be comfortable going to court with that evidence. So we don't let them retake the test for free, but they still can take it by purchasing another credit. So this is something that we use a lot to based on the evidence at hand, based on all of our policies. And we have very clear guidelines about what is like a true misconduct outcome versus what are these lower tiers of outcomes for test takers.
Yeah, and that's a really effective way to address that. And I did see Salma had some stuff in the chat for that too. Kelly, can we go to you? Thanks, Will.
Thanks. I'm an Ontario-based regulator in Canada, so I
Aha.
echo some of the comments of the others, and we struggle with this too because we have strong policies in place. We have, contracts, confidentiality statements, all that. We can enforce this, but our registrar is also a lawyer, so she comes from a background where she wants to see that hard and fast evidence before we invalidate a score. And even though we have a psychometrician who may question the validity, see some irregular response patterns, and it could be enough to question the validity of the score, but I think she doesn't feel it's going to stand up on an appeal. And so I like this option. We have discussed this option internally because I've seen it presented on at other clear conferences where you offer them a free retake, make them go in person. We're almost 100% back in person anyways, and I like that. It's just, it is a difficult conversation to even say, okay, well, I already tested, you know, I think I did well. Nobody wants to retake an exam. So it's
Nope.
a great option, but we're not accusing you of anything.
Right.
But we have reason to question the validity of your score, but then they often ask why, to Ada's point. But I like this, and I'd like us to move to a stronger place where we can, ask them to retake at no cost to them in person, maybe even create a special sitting,
Yes.
kind of and there's no accusation, I guess. But yeah, we struggle where that threshold is because our
Mhm.
psychometrician does flag it. And I like how you position this that we don't have to prove cheating.
Right.
It's the validity of the score. So I like that.
That's exactly
Thanks.
right. Yeah, it's really important to approach it that way. And again, I'll go back to those truth in testing laws that required that required some of those things to be developed. So ACT and the College Board have had similar, have had those things in place for, gosh, I want to say a couple of decades now. And it is a very effective way to either reassure yourself, right? If they come in, if they take a special retest, and maybe you have them come in person, those types of things, or they have to use two cameras or whatever whatever that requirement is. And again, while I talked about you have to be consistent, you can't treat the child of a senator differently than, uh, a child who is, coming in and they're the child of an attorney or the child of a school teacher. But you give everyone kind of the same options, and you have clear parameters. Again, you're not trying to prove cheating beyond a reasonable doubt. You need to really think through it. But once you've kind of gotten those things in place, it is a very effective way to fairly resolve any kind of concerns that you have. Because at the end of the day, our job as testing programs, regardless of whether we're certification, licensure, you know, education or admissions, we're providing hopefully valid and reliable evidence or data that people can use to make important life decisions, right? That's our job. We don't make those decisions for people. We provide the data so that someone can make those decisions. Um, I'm going to kind of keep going here just a little bit, although I love this conversation because we did have a question about expanding to remote testing. And it was, I'll come back to some of those questions later, Alyssa, if we have time. People had asked if we expand remote testing instead of on-site testing, what are the key security measures we need to put in place? And so I'm just going to ask, first of all, our kind of webinar guests about some of what they would see as the key security measures for that. Jake, did you have your hand up and I missed it? Okay, keep going. Okay. All right, we'll go to Wally first for this one. Key security measures for expanding remote testing.
Yeah, so the first thing I'll say is location does matter from a threat perspective, right? So it's not an apples to apples comparison necessarily when you look at the threats for in a test center.
Wally, when you say location, are you saying like where your remote test takers are located, or location as in I'm testing in a test center and you're testing remotely?
Yeah, or you're testing in a high school cafeteria, right?
Got it.
I
Okay.
think the location matters because the threats are different. So if you only have today, to try to go down the answer to the question, if you only have test centers today and you're wanting to expand into remote proctoring, a caution would be not to assume that the controls and the test security capabilities, the policy and the processes and in the wanding and those type of the test center controls are not necessarily applicable. All of them are not applicable when you move into a new environment, a new modality with remote proctoring. So the threats are different. So you have to have different controls. If you just have the same controls, I'll just say you might not be as successful against, organized cheating rings and proxy test takers because they are approaching that modality differently. So you have to identify how you're going to approach that modality differently and put in different controls. Like I'll use one, second camera, a very popular control, talked about at a lot of conferences today, right? It's been proven to show that it provides an ability to identify if fraudulent activities are actually happening outside of a test center. You don't usually use a second camera in a test center because that control doesn't necessarily provide the same value and effectiveness that it would in a remote proctoring or a different type of modality environment. So that's just one, and there's and again, I'll turn it over to Will and Claire. It's really not about how many controls you have. So it's not a numbers game. It's not like, oh, I've got 100 and Claire only has 5. It's really not a numbers game. It's about the effectiveness of the control based off of where you're taking the exam and the threats that are could be introduced in that environment.
So I'm just going to say, so you need to understand what the key risks are and then align your mitigation strategies to those risks. And it is a little different depending on whether you're remote versus in a test center versus in a school setting.
Yes.
Will, can I call on you next? Since I put Claire in front of you before. Sorry, Claire.
Yeah, that's a great answer by Wally. So I'm going to speak on the proctoring side. So Duolingo's a fully remote test and it's asynchronously proctored. So there's no live person there watching someone while they're taking the test. It all happens after they complete it. And in our case, going back to the policy question, although not to take us back there fully, is that we have proctors making many decisions all the time, and they have to follow all these different policies um, you know, because you can't control the physical environment with a remote test, there's so many edge cases that proctors have to deal with. And if you have all these different policies talking about, this is a minor rule violation, this is a severe rule violation, and this is misconduct, there's going to be variability and subjectivity in how proctors are making their decisions. So my work is focused specifically on making sure proctors are making consistent decisions, fair decisions as well. So having more focus on how proctoring works and then making sure you're measuring the things that you can track the quality of proctoring decisions, I think is really important for an organization thinking about moving towards a remote testing option.
Thanks, Will. Okay, Claire.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with everything that's been said. I think, to be honest, there's quite a lot to consider. We wouldn't have time to go through all of it today, but I mean, a thorough threat analysis, either do it yourselves or get in some external experts. How would somebody cheat on the test? And I've brought it, we've got a good cybersecurity team. I go to them and ask these questions as well because they will think of things that we might not have thought of before. So what are all the ways that somebody could cheat and what are the mitigations we can put in place? Data will definitely be in the mix as one of the things we would need. Obviously, there's quite a lot of different mitigations. And I think the other thing to bear in mind if you're expanding remote testing, what we find at least is you see significantly higher attempts at cheating in remote tests. And so we need to make sure we've got a team the right size to deal with that. Expect to see more attempts at cheating and make sure you've got people who can review the videos, review the cases, make the decisions. Because it's different when you're managing within center. You might have more people managing a center network and not as many at the latter end of the process. But when it's remote testing, I find I need more at the latter end of the process because we just see much higher volume of people trying to cheat.
Yeah, that's really well said. I think, Claire, like your resources and where you're spending your money, and this is kind of what Wally was talking about too, it will probably shift as you look from I'm looking to expand my remote offerings or get into remote offerings. One of the other things that I think is really important, this actually harkens back to what Alyssa and I cannot remember who brought up, was it Kelly? Brought up. This is one of the things that I think makes exam security so interesting. It is not one size fits all, and there are so many reasons for that. Some of that is because the stakes of our exam. Some of it's our demographics. Some of it's how we deliver. But another piece of that is really your internal risk tolerance. And when I say your, I really mean your corporate risk tolerance. So if you have a corporate risk tolerance of we never want to do anything that might result in us being sued, okay, that has a certain level, that has a certain corporate risk tolerance that is something that, will impact where you're going to put your money, where you're going to put your resources. And same thing with, expanding your remote testing options. Again, you're going to look at what is our risk tolerance for some of these things because your risks will shift. And, some of the challenges that you're going to face are a different type of challenge than you've invested in before. It may require different staff investments, different technology investments, those types of things. And so when you're looking at making some of these changes, as Claire said, this could be a very long conversation in and of itself and requires, because we are never one size fits all, a little bit more targeted conversation specific to your program. But whether it's should we expand and how do we do it, or whether it's the question of do we address an incident and how do we address it, your corporate risk tolerance will make a difference in that. So, Molly, you heard from Molly, she has a leader that's very like, oof, I don't know that I want to do that. Um, if you are going to do it, you want to make sure you've got appropriate policies and procedures in place, as Wally said, and that you are, as Will said, handling things fairly and consistently. So all of those things require not just a decision, but an operational and a process consideration as well to go with it. And Mark, bring in another attorney because there's never enough of us on these calls, Mark.
Yeah, hi everybody. I love the discussion about risk tolerance. I just have been trying to spread the news on a particular development here in the US. Earlier this year, the Supreme Court, and it's a ruling called Cox versus Sony. They basically said that online service providers aren't going to be held liable now for copyright infringement of their users. So as part of your risk tolerance discussion, you're going to have to know that now, if you move to remote testing and your information gets harvested and gets put on Instagram and Facebook and wherever else, it's going to be much harder to get that stuff taken down because there's not the same type of incentive um, that online service providers had before this ruling, before that they could potentially be held liable, and now they kind of have this get out of jail card. So just another thing for everybody to think about when they have those discussions.
Wow.
Yeah, thank you. There are definitely a number of regulatory, statutory considerations. And if you are in a regulatory space like our colleagues from Canada or some of the participants who may be here from the UK, yeah, there, again, it's why one size does not fit all. I'm going to ask another question that came in during our webinar, and it's specific to actually conversational testing, which I think is really interesting. But it asks the question about how your security issues are different from conversational testing versus, some of the paper pencil testing. And I think that's interesting because we are seeing more push for what I'll call authentic assessment. And I think conversational testing, beyond just language testing, we could see that become a more important part of standardized assessments. So we'll go to our language test takers here if they want to talk about that. And I think, specifically the question was about, there's an audio stimulus and then a candidate talks back. So those types of security issues, how are those different? Will, I saw your hand this time.
Yeah, so for our test, we actually don't have a live person who's talking to the test taker to evaluate their proficiency. All of this is embedded in the test itself. So we have actually like an AI agent who is able to communicate with the test taker, and then we evaluate their proficiency based on that. I would mention that cheating on speaking tasks is much more difficult than cheating on other kinds of tasks. And so we devote a lot of our proctoring time to speaking portions of the test, to ensure that, no sort of lip syncing or, trying to read from a script kinds of things are happening. We also have lots of other tools at our disposal, like gaming is also kind of, it's not a form of cheating per se, but it's in this gray zone of like, you're trying to game the scoring algorithm. And so
Uh-huh.
we have ways to basically reduce their grade if we've detected that they're using canned phrases, essentially. Um, so yeah, I mean, speaking is definitely a powerful place where you can use different kinds of tools to investigate whether someone's taking a test in good faith or maybe engaging in some misconduct.
Claire, can I go to you next?
Yeah, we've got a range of different speaking tests. Some are with a live human examiner, some are responding to prompts. So for example, when it's with a human examiner, what we'd typically see is people trying to get an impersonator to go and do the test for them. With the ones where they're responding to prompts, there's more variety in how they attempt to cheat. But the really useful thing is when you've got an audio recording or video recording, there's a lot you can tell from that. And it's very, very useful for us. And one of the things we look at is if there's a significantly different score for the speaking part of the exam compared to other parts of the exam. Because if you do really well in everything else, but not so well in the speaking, for example, that can be an indicator on its own. It's not enough, but it would flag for an investigation. And so I think the fact that we've got a speaking part of the exam is actually very useful for us in terms of security.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it is very interesting when we start to think about some of the different ways that um, different job task analyses are performed. We may see opportunities beyond our, language skills assessments to start to integrate those. So I just think I love this question. Wally.
Yeah, I would just, to add to it, to add to what Will and Claire said, and to reinforce that, from my perspective, it's a good thing to have a speaking part, right? Because if you're trying to identify the validity of a score, the different ways to capture data, and certainly having a speaking way section in your exam actually is just another way to capture more data. Because as Claire mentioned, you could have a very large score difference between, different parts of the test, and then you get the speaking. Knowing the speaking is typically the most difficult, but it does provide another data point, right, to help validate the integrity of that score. So I look at it as it's a positive because it gives us other ways to identify outside of, and this isn't a criticism, but, just a multiple choice exam, right? Versus exam that maybe has a reading and a writing in different areas. So it just helps provide more validity to the score and making the right decision. So as Will mentioned, looking at, if someone is lip syncing, because that is a very common way to get past the speaking section, is you're not actually the person speaking. Someone is speaking for you. You're just moving your lips, just like someone is actually typing for you. You're just pretending to type, right? So, and another one is mechanical speech. If you're talking like a robot, you're probably reading a script, right? So for us being responsible, right, for the validity of that score, it's another data point that just helps us build a defensible decision that when we can sleep at night knowing that we've done everything that we can do and that score is as valid as we're able to justify.
Right. Yeah. That is, I think, well said. Thank you, everyone, for your feedback on that. Okay, so one of the questions that came in is about your opinion on leveraging AI more to push back against the undercover use of AI during online proctored exams, and certainly, trying to use a deep fake, for example, during speaking sessions, because we know you can both, deep fake someone's voice as well as their face. So I didn't know, do you guys want to talk a little bit about that? Do you have any thoughts around how we can use AI, for good and not evil?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Wally, we'll go to you first.
Yeah, so yes, absolutely. I think I'm not sharing a revelation when we're going to use AI to combat AI. So if AI is being used in a fraudulent way, then it would make sense for us to have AI capabilities to support our proctors, as Will would say, support the proctors. They have a very hard job. So using AI as another tool in your tool belt, no one says that we can't, fight back with the same type of technology because again, we're playing a lot of defense, right? And so I think it's a very positive thing, and you can use technology such as AI, and AI is just a technology we're talking about today, but there might in 5 years from now it'll be a different technology, right?
Yeah,
So I think it's a continuous evolution, and I'll turn it over to Will or Claire.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to go to Claire because I saw her hand up first. Well, this time. Sorry, buddy.
Yeah. So just, building on what Wally said, we'll use any tool that's reasonable and practical, and automation, including AI, is an important part of that. in our case, we want to make sure if we're using any automation that it works correctly, that we set the thresholds correctly, that we've built it correctly. So there's a lot of monitoring of anything like that that we're using to make sure that it's effective, to make sure it's doing what we want it to do. And then in our case, although we'll use AI to flag things, we won't have it make the decision to disqualify somebody. That will then be reviewed by a human, usually as part of an investigation, and then a decision made on whether or not to disqualify. Partly we consider that best practice, but also we are regulated by the UK body Ofqual. And so for that reason, we have to make sure that we've got a human making those decisions. But when you're operating at scale like us, then automation is incredibly useful. And you know, why not use the best of automation, the best of AI, and the best of people?
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and I think, you know, we all understand that AI is not magic and AI is not infallible. And that's why, you know, as you said, use the best of the technology, use the best of people, and make those processes work together. And that was very well said. Okay, Will.
Yeah, like Claire and Wally said, there's no question that AI can be used to fight back against cheating. I'll focus more on the honest test taker side, because we use a lot of AI to make the process smoother for test takers. So one example of this is we have different like guided setups because there isn't a human there at the same time to tell them, oh, please position your camera correctly so I can see the full of your full laptop. But we have a a guided process that uses AI vision to determine that, oh yes, in fact, your computer is properly visible. And so instead of having them go through the whole test and then realizing, oh, we have to invalidate it because we couldn't see their screen because they were blocking it. We use AI to like help that experience.
Yeah.
And so I think it can be used for, yeah, just improving the overall experience of honest test takers while also um, you know, it's this arms race, of course, right? Using AI to fight back against AI cheating. Um, but yeah, it's useful for all different kinds of things. But I would emphasize what Claire said is there has to be guardrails on it. And we do follow the same model of like a human makes the final decision. Um, and some AIs have very low false positive rates. Even still, we require a human to corroborate that with other evidence.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. I want to give a shout out to Jake and Will and Claire and Wally for kind of keeping your eye on the chat, the comments over there, because I have probably not been doing a very good job. But I think it's important for us to remember that oftentimes when we're thinking about this, it is not one specific piece of evidence that is kind of the smoking gun. It's oftentimes a number of different pieces of evidence that, you know, Claire had talked about a trigger. I call them suspicion indicators, right? There's a reason that we're like, hey, this test seems odd to me. We cannot afford to put, you know, time and attention into every single test that's out there. So if the test does not trip a suspicion indicator, and we've used all of our good security layers before then around identification and proctoring and all the other, you know, kind of good common practices we have, we don't have a reason to question that score. If there's no reason to question the score, it's going to continue through. But if there is a suspicion indicator, then you're going to start to say, okay, this thing came up. What else corroborates that? What else is in our evidentiary pool that makes us say that it is more likely than not that this is an invalid score? And so I guess I will kind of leave us with that because I know we're getting close to our time here. But I think that's one of the things as security professionals that we encourage people to look at is look at the totality of the evidence. And that is, you know, kind of that's our role, right? So we go back to saying within our organization, our job is to provide valid and reliable data to people to make important life decisions. And if we have concerns that the data that we're providing is not valid or reliable for whatever reason, we're going to look at the totality of the evidence and say, Are we able to stand behind a decision to not deliver that result or maybe to revoke that result? Or is there just, I mean, sometimes the reality is it doesn't look quite right, but there's not enough there to take action. And so you let it go through. If someone was engaging in misconduct, they're probably, I mean, they know it. You don't know, and you don't know for sure. You'll never know 100%. But if you start pushing back, I did see something in here where Will's like, yeah, people threaten to sue us all the time, but you know, that goes back to our risk tolerance, right? So if you never want somebody to threaten to sue you, okay, then I would question, are we even in the right business? Because it is still our job to put good scores out there. But if they're going to take that next step, you have looked at the totality of the evidence and you have a good reason to say you can defend your activity. Again, it kind of comes back to your risk tolerance, but you want to put your company in a position, your testing program in a position where you can do that. Using ChatGPT to make legally ominous emails. Shocker there. I want to pause for just a second. We have 4 minutes left, and I want to say thank you to Will, to Wally, to Claire, to everyone who participated with questions today and who just came to just be part of the conversation. Thanks to Isabel and to Nina for getting this all set up. We really appreciate it. We want to continue to have these conversations. So hopefully you'll be seeing another coffee chat come around and we can continue to have these conversations. We are going to have another formal webinar too later in the year, which will be focused a little bit more on privacy, one of our subcommittees. So with that, let's raise our glasses. Cheers to all of us. Thanks everybody for being here. We appreciate you. We wish you a great weekend. And I think that's it, unless Nina has something.
No, that's all. Thank you guys so much. You'll receive the recording of this coffee chat along with a few more resources tomorrow. So thank you guys for joining.
And keep on coming back for the security committee. We want to hear from you. Thanks, everybody.